right, I'm going to call roll for the Commission to Investigate Racialized Harms. So, William Newman.
Here.
Felicia Lundquist. Garrick Perry.
Here.
Jeremy Baker Paquette. Not present. Marissa Elkins.
Here.
Marsha Morris. Usman Power Green.
Here.
Renika Montgomery Tamaclo.
Here.
Thanks. Sarah Lynn Patterson.
Present.
Rachel Naismith.
Here.
And I'm the vacant Human Rights Commission. So we do have quorum, so I call the meeting to order.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Happy Black History Month. We are going to open our session with public comment. Does anyone have a public comment? If you do, please raise your hand on Zoom. The Unitarian Society, you are recognized.
Hi, my name is Ed Olmsted. I'm sorry, my name, I'll try to fix that. I'll go off Zoom and see if I can fix that. But my name is Ed Olmsted. I live in Florence. Sorry about that. And I'm here in support of the work of this commission because I believe that this work is important and for the lifting up of our whole community. I believe the work you are doing will eliminate harms done to those of African heritage in this area, will help us all understand what can best be done to assure that everyone has equal opportunity for a voice at the table of decision making and a sense of security in living one's life and caring for oneself and one's family here. As a community, I believe we'll benefit from your help in understanding what we can do and should do to remove unfair and unnecessary barriers to full participation in our democracy and in our community at large. Your sharing and inviting honest conversations about the diversity of opinions and perspectives by all of you commission members has already been a valuable contribution. I appreciate that the Northampton Reparations Committee, the precursor to this, and ultimately the Northampton City Council, for their wisdom in requiring the commission to be composed of a majority of Black members. It speaks well of the city officials that this commission well exceeded the minimum requirement of 50% Black members. Thank you to you, the Black members of this commission, for agreeing to serve and for sharing the range of perspectives and opinions you hold. I look forward to hearing the further conversations that arise and the wisdom that comes from the conversations of all the members of this solidly Black majority commission. This is a rare and valuable opportunity for me to hear from such a majority Black group. And I believe it is a rare and valuable opportunity for many others in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on Zoom? The in-person speaker, Tom Wiener, you are acknowledged.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. It's Scott Green. Two things that I didn't see on the agenda that I wanted to just check in about. The first was, is there going to be any discussion tonight or in the very near future, I would hope, about issuing an apology? Because I know it came up at the last meeting, but it didn't resurface tonight, and it seems like the most quickest concrete action this commission could take, and it was one of the things that was highly urged in the Northampton Reparations Committee resolution. Thing one, I don't think you answer my question, so I think you take them under advisement or something. And thing two is, I also didn't see any reference to, there's supposed to be a listening session in February. It's not happening. I had arranged for College Church, I got the place, I got the date. It's not happening, but I didn't even see any reference in the agenda to having the subcommittee that was supposed to have met since January meeting to organize a listening session. Instead, I saw the educational session mentioned, which I thought was Tikkun Olam was organizing that in March. So I'm confused. I don't know if you are. It would be great to be unconfused and to find out what's happening with that listening session, because College Church fully got on board, fully endorsed it, had it all worked out with people that were going to host it and welcome us, et cetera, and now it's not going to happen. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Andrea Reber, you are acknowledged.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Reber. I live on Franklin Street, and I just want to express my appreciation for your work and your efforts. I've attended several of these meetings, and I see how dedicated and detailed the work is, and how complicated it is, and how there are starts and stops happening. And I'm just really, really grateful to all of you for volunteering your time and energy to do this very, very important work. I care about reparations hugely and am involved in it in various ways all over this area. So I'm going to keep coming and keep supporting you, and thank you again.
Thank you, Andrea. John Berkowitz, you are acknowledged.
Yeah, John Berkowitz, also from Franklin Street. I just wanted to add that for you all, if you hadn't heard about it, for the public as well, next Thursday in Springfield, New England Public Media and some other organizations are hosting a major event about reparations, showing the new film, The Cost of Inheritance, and then having a panel of distinguished speakers. Michelle Miller, who was the guest speaker here a while ago from Amherst, the reparations effort in Amherst. Dr. Shabazz, I believe, will be there, and some other really good speakers. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention and really just say that I am so glad that not just Northampton and not just Amherst, but this reparations initiatives are happening not just here in Massachusetts, all over the Valley, but nationwide. I'm excited about that, as I am your continuing work. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Miss, you are acknowledged.
Akwe, my name is Jasmine Goodspeed. I am Nipmuc, and I'm here at the meeting because I'd reached out to the mayor to ask about reparations, and was told that there was a reparations committee, but Native people weren't involved. And I want to stand in solidarity with you guys, and I'm super excited about the work that you're doing. And I was just curious as to why Native voices are not included in this reparations council, and if this is not the place for them, as it seemed like from your meeting notes. I apologize, this is the first I've heard of it and that I'm attending. But if this isn't the place for it, then I would love to know where the place for it might be, and how we can collaborate and work together, and how we can support each other as communities.
Thank you, Jasmine. Tom, you're acknowledged.
Just a quick correction, the event is next Tuesday night, not Thursday, at Springfield College, and they just opened up another 200 seats after it was sold out. As of yesterday, 200 more seats were opened up, and some of the people that made the film are going to be there. The women who were the ones who acknowledged their ancestors were enslavers and then found the enslaved descendants. They're going to be there too.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any more public comments? We will now close this section of our meeting and begin the next section of our meeting, which focuses on Black History Month and the reading of the names of Northampton, Massachusetts 50 slaves. I ask now that all members of the commission please open your document, navigate to your email if you have your computer. We will sequentially read the names of African Americans who were enslaved in this place, 50 of them, in appreciation of their uncompensated labor and the hardship and the traumas that they endured, the contributions that they made to our culture. And although we understand that just the resonances of their lives, even with the biographies, exists in our are available to us, we stand in solidarity with them and their ancestry and their lineage. And so we will read their names. Are there any volunteers to begin? Councilor Perry?
Yeah. Bess.
Will you read the first 10 names? You and Bill?
Okay. I'll do the first 5, Bill.
Okay.
Bess, Joab Binney, Rose Binney, Cato, Caesar. Now you.
Want to do next?
Next 5.
Sylvia Church.
We got to turn your mic on.
Sylvia Church. Coffee. Dinah. Dinah. Dorothy.
Felix. Felix. Hannah. Amos Hull, Sr. Bathsheba Hull. Ishmael. Jack. Jack.
Jason, Jesse, Joab, Jonah, Josie, Leah, Mingo. Got it there.
Modor, Nane, Peter, Phyllis.
I'll continue. Pompey, Abijah Prince, Simon, Tom, Tony.
Venus, male child, man, person, 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 woman. And for some of you guys, you've heard some of our chimes. They're just small ways to acknowledge the names of those who have been called. Thank you. All right, moving on, we are going to, I make a motion for a second for the approval of minutes for November, for December, and for the transcript for December. Is there a second?
I second.
We have a second? Can you call the roll, the vote?
Yes. Bill Newman,
Yes.
Felicia Lundquist, Garrick Perry,
Yes.
Marissa Elkins,
Yes.
Usman Power Green,
Yes.
Renika Montgomery Tamaclo,
Yes.
Sarah Lynn Patterson,
Yes.
Rachel Naismith.
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks to everybody. All right, so moving on. Our next topic of discussion includes updates on reparations-related topics. If you are a commissioner, I recommend that you navigate to your email and open the Massachusetts Legislature Bill S-1053, an act establishing a commission to study reparations in Massachusetts. Many thanks to Sierra Crosby, who in our last public comments raised the Massachusetts Legislature as a site of discourse that we should be engaged in our meetings. And so I have shared that document with you and invite any comments or thoughts that you have. Feel free to take a minute to review the text.
Should we raise hands to acknowledge Sarah?
Yes. Usman is acknowledged.
One observation I made just immediately on the first page is our state senator Joanne Comerford on the as a part of this commission. So I think that speaks highly of us and the community being involved in this work on a state level, and then of course for Northampton, I think this will give us an opportunity to stay, abreast of what's happening on a state level, by the presence of Senator Comerford. So.
As many of you might know, there is also a reparations panel that is in session now in Boston. And so Liz Miranda, their representative, is the key sponsor, as well as Usman mentioned, Joanne Comerford, and also Mindy Dom, who's a representative for Amherst and who has been a long time supporter. I think it's quite useful to note that the bill really focuses on reparative justice, transitional justice, and asks questions of different types of reparative justice, largely centered on the gravity of violations and harms suffered based on slavery first, and those sorts of legislation, bills, and acts that came from it. And it really does encourage a return to slavery and those harms associated with slavery, given that it is likely the most compelling, data source of harms. And while I know a lot of folks are interested in contemporary harms, I think this bill does ask us to return to the source of injustice in ways that are really beneficial and that are, I think, in touch with our methodology. I had mentioned before that folks who had been attentive to strict scrutiny, which is a governmental concept that orders the framework by which legislatures and other community members who want to put forward reparations proposals have to abide by, or you have to abide by the dictates of, in general, strict scrutiny. If you look back at our annotated bibliography, you'll see the write-up definition and paperwork on that term. And it really asks for an abundance of statistical evidence to substantiate claims of wrongs that could justify any benefits given to one particular racial group over another. The irony, I think, for many of us who agree with reparations for African Americans, people of African descent, is that slavery itself has already abundance of statistical evidence associated with it. And I think that a commission at the state level could look deeply into, for example, why slave ledgers don't count or haven't counted as a source of abundance of statistical data that names people, the owners associated, the costs. It seems quite odd, in fact, that that hasn't been considered the primary source material already. If there are no other comments on this particular document, we will move forward. Usman?
Well, I guess just the one other comment that I wanted to make after reading this was just that I'm constantly reminded that people spend a lot of time, working through language and putting these together. And I do think that, when it comes to us, looking at the list of items for us to do and these sorts of things, that we just, continue to try to draw from, what people have done, you know what I mean? As opposed to thinking we need to, it feels overwhelming to me to feel like starting from scratch, Whereas when you look at something like this, so I'm glad that you brought it to my attention, because I read the Boston one, but I didn't read the state one. So I was really happy that you brought it to my attention. It just is a reminder, right, that there's people are putting language together and writing things down, and as we're going forward, I just think we should continue to draw from these to direct us one way or the other, because it puts us in line with what the state, people are doing on a state level. So I just wanted to point that out, and thank you, Sarah, for bringing it to our attention, because as I said, I missed it.
acknowledged.
I'd just like to make two comments on things that have happened so far in this meeting. One is with regard to Usman's most recent comment. I think it's really well taken, and I think what it does point to is the correctness of the decision we made last session with regard to the name of this commission, which is we're part of a nationwide movement. And a statewide movement. Let's name ourselves properly for what we are part of. And I think it's helpful for us, and I think it's helpful for the movement. The second thing is that I know we are abiding by the general rules for Northampton committees and commissions, which is we don't respond to public comment. That said, I think that the interests of orderliness and formality probably should give way at times to having some interaction with people who come here to talk to us. And what I'd like to suggest in that regard is that we have something at the beginning of each agenda, an item called any additional items for the agenda, and maybe we could put responses to public comment, if any, on the agenda as a routine matter. Because I think people come here and talk. If we have something to say in response, I think it's right as a general matter to go back and forth on public comment. That rule's been in effect in Northampton and city council meetings forever, as far as I can tell, at least since there's been public comment. But I do think that people come and have something to say. We should be able to should give a response if we can.
Well, up until now, we have offered avenues, so a person can request prior to meetings to be a guest speaker. And then I think the logic behind how we've typically, and how the municipality runs this, is that it gives us time to think about what they've said and to also add that content to the agenda. So for example, Sierra Crosby has offered these amendments or these bills up for our consideration, as well as the United Nations reparations term. And so now her comments have been added to our agenda for this month. So, but I do acknowledge that that's a good idea. And so you could make a motion to suspend the rules, and we would have to vote on it, and then we could do that for you.
Okay.
That's how we would do it. And also, I just want to also note that we usually go right till 7 o'clock usually with our meetings. So that's why we haven't done that.
Also, just to follow Usman for those, I don't know if that matters. It would be a little disappointing if people did come expecting to be able to engage the commission directly, and then it turns out that there is a perception that based on the comment that we choose not to address that particular person and not somebody else's. And so I would just be worried that if we begin engaging public comments, that someone might perceive that their comment, well, I came and I made this comment, the commissioners ignored me, but then that person they went on and on about. So I would just be worried about, particularly if it's as thoughtful as the comments today, that are important for us to ponder an appropriate public response. So there's an individual response, the person in the room, then there's like the rest of the human history response, which is on record.
There's a hand up.
Rachel, you're acknowledged.
Yeah, I can see both sides of this. I always want to respond when there's a question or comment, but I like the idea of being able to mull things over. I'm wondering if there's an actual question, like what happened about the February meeting, if there's a way of incorporating that into the updates.
The plan was the educational event is just an umbrella term for all events, so it is scheduled to be discussed.
Great.
Eric, I think you were. Moving on, are there any comments for the next piece that was? Are there any comments for the next piece that's on our agenda? So if everyone can navigate to the reparations definition that is attached to your email. For those who are in the audience, we're looking at the reparations definition produced by the United Nations. Victims have a right to reparation, This refers to measures to redress violations of human rights by providing a range of material and symbolic benefits to victims or their families, as well as affected communities. Reparation must be adequate, effective, prompt, and should be proportional to the gravity of the violations and the harm suffered. Reparation measures include restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, and satisfaction. Now, I just want to ask if folks have thoughts on the fact that, we've read the names of the 50 slaves of Northampton, their biographies are attached. What ways have those names and those stories influenced your perspectives for the commissioners? You're acknowledged. Rachel?
Who? Oh, right. Reading the stories, reading the very, very brief biographies had a powerful effect on me, in part because so little is available in terms of information. That there are people we don't know their names. There are people that we barely know their stories. And I also acknowledge the work that went behind the people who found whatever information was available.
I'd like to acknowledge Emma and Betty Sharp and Laura Sanders, who headed this project at Historic Northampton. I think it's really interesting that a lot of the slave records have been and were kept by the churches here in Northampton, and how early Protestantism was a facade, or really a veil that protected individuals from scrutiny concerning the violence that is inherent in the institution of slavery. The other irony, of course, is that the temperance movement was generated mostly early on by New Yorkers and Massachusetts residents. So there's another layer of irony for people who supposedly wanted to purify their communities with anti-alcohol and other anti-immorality positions, were still complicit, if not direct supporters. Also knowing that high-quality liquor was coming from the slave trade, from the West Indies, and driven through this area quite a bit as a luxury good. So there are many layers, I think, that we can, piece out. Councilor Perry?
Yeah, so I want to echo what a lot of people are saying, that a thing that stood out to me was how little we did know about the people who were enslaved here. And I also salute the people who did the work, but I still found it very powerful just to hear the names. Words have power, words have meaning, and speaking those things to existence, especially as we approach the end when it's just person not named, was a stark reminder of how little slaves were thought of as people. And also on a side note, I want to say that to people listening or reviewing this later, that I would suggest that you go to the website that was done by Historic Northampton. They do a great job of breaking down relationships, giving what stories they have, and it's some fine work, and I'm thankful. I remember when Tom first told me about it, and just to see it in its completed state was very moving. So thank you for bringing that up and allowing us to give a moment to respect those.
Madam Chair?
Bill, you're acknowledged.
I agree with what Councilor Perry's just said. I think that was very eloquent. And I agree that reading the names, and I appreciate that suggestion that we do that, was very powerful, and the names that we didn't know and they're lost to history, extremely moving. There's one other perception I had after reading those names, and that was how difficult it would be to try to specifically address reparations towards the families or the descendants of those persons who were enslaved in Northampton, looking at it from a very practical point of view. And I keep coming back in my own mind to a question that has been part of our discussions since the beginning, which is, although there's a lot of research to do, there is also the ultimate objective here of what are we trying to accomplish. And so as we go through these research projects and investigations, I think that is important to bear in mind, and I think it's particularly important to bear in mind in view of the film, the cost of inheritance, because the film is about a white family that says we were enslavers, and black families that say, and our descendants were the enslaved, and they had a conversation to have. And I'm very, very pleased to learn that there'll be some discussion next week at this meeting, at the showing of the film, the screening, about local reparations efforts, because it seems to me that what happened there in that community was unique. And if there are some suggestions on how that can be used as a model in some ways for us, that would be really interesting and helpful to know.
It occurs to me to, Usman, you can go first, actually.
Oh, no, I was just going to respond to something that you just said. So just to build on, Bill, what you had mentioned, part of, it's thinking about the sort of foundational elements of, what we're trying to do in terms of reparations. I mean, the sort of, using the UN definition. I mean, satisfaction, acknowledgement, just what we did, I think is critical. It's absolutely critical. And part of the reason why it's critical is the denial is so deep, like our state's denial. It brings me, so this project, and one of the reasons it's such an important project is the list of enslavers in Northampton, which we didn't, we don't necessarily get into, but I suggest you all look at those, because every street name, many street names, not every, street names, what dots the intellectual landscape of this town is the name of enslavers. Now, what we personally, how we feel about the Hawleys and others who were enslavers, that's another conversation. But all around us are the representation of people that held slavery, And so the work that Historic Northampton done is foundational to the process, because had they not done that, had the timing been different, it would be, we have to do a lot of work. They just laid it out for us in a shocking way. So I just want to acknowledge that element too, because I do think that that it's critical that we really think about the reality that we walk down these streets and we're in these spaces. And then the second thing that I want to bring up too is, the wealth that was generated here in Northampton, which some of you are aware of, in the 1850s. 1840s, right? We will be able to trace to that. It's going to take work, but we will be able to understand the wealth from, enslavers who came to Northampton, right? And we're here in the summer, whenever, bought property, were taxed, and I think that might be a pathway, to a more direct relationship, particularly with places in the South where some of these people owned enslaved people. So, but yeah.
If I could just respond, I think that this notion of the presence of the memory and the history of enslavement in Northampton is really important. And I was moved and impressed by how the Amherst Reparations Commission dealt with that and had a number of suggestions, which I said, boy, they did a lot of work. Why can't we build on that? We can build on that, including, I think, for example, and I don't remember the exact words that the report used, but it was kind of like, why don't we have a main thoroughfare in Amherst called Martin Luther King Boulevard? Why don't we? I think that what Usmani raises is really one half of what we're looking at, which is how do we address the issues of these remnants of slavery that are still very much here on a very practical level. The names of streets, which you would think we should be able, the city, should be able to do something about, and which we, as a commission, should be able to make recommendations about. The other half of that, obviously, it's a related corollary, which is how do we do justice for those who most directly suffered, which is, I think, a harder question.
Your mic?
There's so many things swirling in my head right now, but I'm thinking about, as we talk about the history of Northampton and conversations, and I'm hearing my peers talk about conversations of white folks, black folks, people of color, in ways of intersections. And I think about the connectedness to conversations, present conversations around anti-blackness, and also thinking about white fragility and why we're not having those deep conversations as much, and those connections. And I'm wondering, and I hear some of my peers talk about where are we going with this, and how do we do that? And I think, and also hearing folks talk about spaces for conversation and dialogue, and being able to view the history, viewings of documentaries, and being able to dialogue around that. I wonder if there are ways in which we can make those connections in a way that both meets the needs of the commission, but also I hear sort of there's a need for more of the community for dialogue around solidarity and what the connections to reparations means for our community.
I make a motion to acknowledge Tom Weiner as a guest speaker. Is there a second? Can you call a vote?
Call a vote. Bill Newman,
Yes.
Felicia Lundquist, Garrick Perry,
Yes.
Jeremy Baker Paquette,
Yes.
Marissa Elkins,
Yes.
Usman Power Green,
Yes.
Renika Montgomery Tamaclo,
Yes.
Sarah Lynn Patterson,
Yes.
Rachel Naismith.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. Two quick things, I think. One is that website is why we need an apology before we even get to what's happened in the last Jim Crow 150 years since. This is gut-wrenching. From when I read it the first time, when I went to that site, I mean, it's just such an incredibly powerful reminder that this is a community that enslaved people, and we only got the 50. There's lots more people that were enslaved that we don't even know. It's not even about whether they were known or a person. There was no records, and so these people are not in this list. So for me, this is a place of a lot of compassionate, empathetic feelings of what those people endured that needs to be acknowledged through an apology. And the second thing is, street names is a great example. This needs to go to the schools. And this commission, as part of reparations work and recommendations and actions, could be imparting, taking this incredible piece of research that website represents and making sure that teachers are using it in their classrooms so that kids are saying those names and it's resonating in what it means. And yeah, it's going to maybe be uncomfortable and then maybe push some white fragility buttons, but it's got to be part of this healing. Thanks.
So I kind of want to, Renika, please.
Yeah, so I think for me, what it brings up is even though they had everything stripped from them, they still tried to hang on to some of their culture. So if you look at Nana and Coffee, those are Ghanaian names. Coffee is a corruption of the name Kofi, which means born on a Friday. I know this because my husband's a Kofi. And so if you look at these records, and we do a lot of research, if you look at records, you'll see people named Cuffy, Coffee, Nani, Nanny, Nana. Nana's a Ghanaian name. and other names, trying to hold on to their heritage even after they were dragged here against their will and enslaved. And I think that that's part of the story that we need to tell too, that like, yes, it was terrible for them, but like, they still held on to the remnants of their heritage and they passed it on.
That's such an important comment. Thank you so much. Alicia.
Yeah, it just reminds me of the resilience within the Black and Brown community. And so I think that there's also something that we need to discuss or look at in terms of, I mean, it's on a daily basis as a Black woman experiencing systematic racism and amongst other things that are intersected is very challenging, but also knowing that there's strength in the resilience, but that we shouldn't have to be because of the systems that exist. They shouldn't exist. And so when we come to a place of equity, you know, that we all can just live in peace. But the resiliency, I think, is really awesome to note, and thank you for making that comment, because I agree.
Sarah, can I just ask if people can talk louder? It's a little hard to hear, and you're saying such important things. Thank you.
Did everyone
You should only move your microphone as well, just for the people.
The other thing that occurs to me is the lack of privacy that African Americans have had over the entire course of their time here. They have always been a source of like public data, public information, and I do want to acknowledge to some extent the protection of their privacy is something that moves against our ability to supply reparations. And so in some ways I feel bad. I just want to acknowledge that I feel that we have to tell every little bit of their story for us to justify the existence, for example, of this commission. And they have been compelled over a long amount of time to always tell the truth, to always expose their inner beliefs and thoughts upon the request of any white apparent person. And that has also been something that has been systemic, where Black folks are told to tell the truth, and white folks are not always told to tell the truth. In fact, they're told to use lies as a form of self-protection. And this has just been another way that privacy has never really been a term associated with Blackness.
I also think about vulnerability, like as I'm listening to you, Dr. Patterson, I think about the vulnerability too of communities, in particular with the folks from Northampton. And so I think, again, resilience, vulnerability, and again, going back to sort of the strength in which folks have the power. And yeah, I'm gonna just stop there.
I just wanted to mention as a point of information that we know that slavery was abolished here in 1783. I want to acknowledge that records such as that don't always tell the complete truth about whether or not slavery was still existing in some way or another in Massachusetts, so I want to start there. But between 1768 and 1772, about a dozen slaves are noted in the historical documents as being imported or exported. Of course, that doesn't account for domestic slaves who were reproducing by way of different types of reproduction, forced or consensual. And of course, we know here, by my calculations, there are 3.78% African Americans here, both who identify as Black only and who identify with Black and another race, so 3.78%. And we have historically struggled with small sample sizes, right? Like, so a small sample size isn't as meaningful because it's not big data. Or a small sample size isn't as meaningful because it doesn't take up some kind of breadth of geographical or other sort of spatial dynamics. There weren't a lot of people, right? And people can easily tout that as a reason to give less attention and devote less resources, fewer resources to this matter. But I just want to acknowledge that if you have, for example, a company and you have like a lot of work to do and you only have a small workforce, that small workforce is responsible for a great deal of work. That's usually how it goes. That's why bigger corporations exist. It's like, oh, not enough people to do all this stuff, and so let's expand, let's expand, let's expand. So I just want to acknowledge that having a small sample size doesn't take away anything from what might have happened. In fact, it might mean that those folks were working harder because there were fewer of them.
Just to sort of add on to that, I mean, I do think that part of the sort of paradigm we're in with understanding enslavement is focus on an individual who lives here as a resident and who has, sort of enslaved somebody. And that's part of the challenge, because people who own property here but wouldn't spend all their time here, to go back to my point earlier, might, sort of are lost in that sense. If they're not laboring towards something direct, they're just working personally one-on-one. Some of that's lost, and that goes all the way up. And this is, I guess, my point. This goes all the way up to 1860. So this is not, the evidence and the fantastic work that was done. I just thought of what you said, Tom, so I was speaking louder. So pardon me, everybody. But the work that was done with Historic Northampton was fantastic, and identified, enslaved people that were associated with particular families, et cetera. Well, we got to reconcile and deal with the sort of shift our paradigm to think about people who move through here, right? So if I'm bringing a person who's enslaved and they are functioning labor for me when I'm here in a short amount of time, or when I'm here on a regular basis, that's something that is really important for our community to understand, because of that, right now it's like as Sarah brought up, since that slavery ended 1783, but it's just not true. It's just that the type that we're talking about, where people are specifically here, sort of more legally speaking, I'm not offering insights that make our work easier, but I just feel like it's important to not, to really discuss the 19th century, because I do think that the prevalence is there, and I mean, it's work that people, who myself included, are doing, and we're gonna have answers for y'all.
Jeremy, would you like to say something? You could take a minute to think about what you might like to say, but if you'd like to say something.
Well, I guess not necessarily. I mean, it seems like people have covered a lot of what I've been thinking. I guess what I have to say is more for, I guess, our next thing on the agenda. But as it has to do with SOCA and the other groups, as I recently had a meeting with them, I think back in January. And there's an Amherst group that was there as well. I forget exactly what they were, but they were another action group as well. So getting contact with them for this commission.
So it might be useful to rehash just a bit of our last meeting's debate about a new name. And so we came up with Northampton Reparations Study Commission as our name. And thanks a lot to Councilor Perry and to our City Council President, Alex Jarrett, who joined me. And also thanks to our mayor for allowing us to have a conversation with her about the change and what we think those points that substantiate the change. And so as it stands, I believe that there is a two-part process that the change must move through, and that includes City Council likely passing an amendment to officially change our name. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that might be like a month or two in the making. right, so if there are no other comments on this particular topic, we will move to our next piece on the discussion of an educational event. So, from my sense, this event has been postponed indefinitely until we come up with a consensus for how to move forward on such an event. The first part of it is just a matter of logistics. There was a subcommittee that was appointed, but the subcommittee wasn't able to meet. And the second part has to do with a group wanting to be informed by legal counsel as to what sorts of dialogue we should provide a platform for, just to ensure that that which is said, the space that we create is a safe space for constructive dialogue about the Black experience. And so this part of the meeting, I think we should just reopen a conversation about what kind of event we want to have. Rachel, you're acknowledged.
I think the term that was used was a listening session, if I am thinking of the correct thing that we're talking about. And so that involves a lot of listening. And I haven't ever actually been to a listening session on any topic. Hopefully someone here has been. But I know that the group that was going to meet was going to try to spell out the how to actually get going on that, get promoting it, find a location, and I guess some of that was done. But I think that, I think it would be a very positive thing, and it's also something that when we were looking at different cities who were involved in reparations work, that all of them seem to include this as a means for the public to get up and speak about their thoughts on topics.
I'd like to confirm my agreement with that. I'd also like to urge us to make this listening session really open to the community. If we only get people who are really devoted to the idea of reparations in some form, we are leaving out a part of the community that has never thought about it, hasn't paid a lot of attention to it, and or may be opposed to it. And I think it's as important that we bring into the conversation as many people from as many different parts of Northampton as possible, because when we make our recommendations, what I think is important is that we have, if not the complete agreement of the community, at least the overwhelming understanding from the community of what we are proposing and why we're doing it. So I think that publicizing these listening sessions and inviting everyone, regardless of their perspective, to come talk to us is important. And for those, of course, who support reparations, I'd love to hear all the ideas and the analysis. But for those who have questions about it, I think they should feel part of this is a community effort, not a political effort per se.
I actually think that we should split them, to be honest, because I do believe that everyone should have a voice, but if you're asking Black people to be vulnerable and talk about a lot of their experiences, you're going to be hard-pressed to have some people willing to sit in a room with people who don't think reparations are necessary and explain their mistreatment, the racism that they've experienced. So I think that, I am all for having multiple listening sessions with different audiences, but I also definitely want to say that I would prioritize listening sessions with members of the African American community.
Tom, then Jeremy.
The listening session that Andrea, Sarah, and I attended was the purpose of it was to hear the harm. That's the thing you're studying, racialized harm. So the purpose of listening sessions, unless you change it up, is to have hopefully a really safe space where people who have experienced harms as African American residents of Northampton over some period of time get to say what that was and feel okay about being safe there to do it. The idea of hearing from a lot of people about how they feel about reparations, that could be a forum. That could be an educational type forum. That's another event. But unless you change up listening sessions, the major reason to have it is so that black people in Northampton can tell you what's been done to them.
Yeah, just continuing off that idea, I think at our last meeting, I think the meeting before, we discussed the idea of having like a closed listening session where specific people could come and they could just discuss what has happened to them, what are the harms, and just openly discuss it. As majority, lots of black people have not had the chance to speak or to voice out anything, especially in an 82% white town. So the idea of a closed listening session, I think, is a great idea.
Yeah, I would just echo that affinity spaces are really productive and can be really useful. And so, and those spaces allow the safety that individuals need, and coming from different identified groups. And I think that as a practice, it is good to have the both and. So including an affinity space where black folks can be present can be a really useful tool.
I have a number of opinions about a listening session. One, even just hearing Tom talk about the point is to hear the harm, and that makes me very nervous. I'm a person, I'm tired of what they call slavery porn and whatnot. Every few years there's a movie about this. I have to be, and I'm very aware that anytime you tell your story of harm, you're reopening those wounds. You are, again, causing harm. It's something that I thought about when I was on the select committee to study barriers to service. I've talked about two people who were on the commission to study police reform as well, and what some of those listening sessions were. And I'm currently of the mind where I know that it's important for us to share our stories and have a safe space, but what I'm more interested in hearing, and I think the point for me, is listening to my people of color, telling me or expressing how they would want things to change, of approaching it from less of reopening these wounds and having a session where people can just, again, the reason why we're here is we know that there have been harms. Like, if anyone tries to tell me different, then we can have a conversation otherwise. So for me, the listening session is really about ways that our community can come together and figure out what we can do positively. So I think that's why it's important, and why I'm glad that we held off on a listening session, because those are two different things, of having a place for people to say, all the bad things that happened to them, versus a way to be like, well, we're acknowledging the bad things happened, but how could we have something better? And so that's kind of where I'm leaning, and what I would like to see out of these listening sessions is that it's just kind of a twist on where we're looking and what we're trying to do. So
Yeah, I want to ask a sensitive question, which if no one wants to answer, that's fine. But for the white commissioners, what if we had an event and we asked all the white people here to come and tell all the times they've been racist?
Say what? Tell.
Well, rhetorically, what if we had an event where we asked all the white people who live in Northampton to come and speak on mic and film of all the times they have behaved in a racist manner? And how would that sit with those folks?
I think that would be a very difficult ask. I think about it from a communications point of view. How would you get people to come and do that? I think you could, but I think it's a tough ask.
Do I need to keep
It's a rhetorical question. I am not suggesting we do such event.
I'd like to try to respond to it.
Yes.
I think it would be very unlikely that you'd have many white people who think they have behaved in a racist way. So there wouldn't even be a group that would be able to acknowledge that about themselves. And in terms of what Garrick was saying, thinking about that Amherst listening session, and the reason I was talking about putting this historical website into the schools, people don't know this stuff. So yeah, there are some people in Northampton that know there's been racism and that people have been hurt because of race. But to me, one of the big reasons for doing this is there are a lot of people that don't. I'm not even sure they'll believe it when you say it, but I really think they need to hear it from people. And when in Amherst, people stood up and talked about exclusion with housing, how they were treated on the street. I don't think white people know that. I would like to think they did. I would like to give them the credit to say, well, the white people in Northampton are really aware of the racism and its impact that it's had for the last 204, however many years, on black people in the town. But I don't see any evidence of that. I don't see it in our newspapers. I don't see it in our schools. I mean, yeah, there are pockets and there are some people, but this is why you do, this is the work to me. So I'd love to see us be able to make that safe space. Maybe it needs to only be black people there. Because I do appreciate the idea of the ripping open the wound again, the re-traumatizing that storytelling can bring. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Marissa, would you like to speak?
Yeah, just to go back to your question, and I disagree. There are many. I would say I would like to believe it's actually a majority of the white people who choose to live in a community like Northampton. I'm not saying that this is true everywhere, but that are very aware of racism. Now it's not the same as fully bringing it into our experience and knowing what that means and having experienced it, but it's an interesting rhetorical question that you asked, Sarah. I think the difficult thing is that the folks that you would get who might participate in something like that, the question is whether or not they feel shame over it, or whether or not they've metabolized it, to use a therapy word, and engaged with it, and then asked of themselves, like, what does it mean in this community? What does it mean how I live? So, I have to say, I think that would be it's a sort of an interesting thought experiment. I'm also not sure. Just as it is not, just as Garrick suggests, that perhaps the step of asking people to explain again, especially in sort of mixed company and in potentially unsafe places, to revisit again their trauma. Whether or not that is the most productive way to get to the next step about how are we as a community going to come next. And I can appreciate that people might not have a sympathy about how it might feel as a white person to be asked or encouraged or to just go through the experience of explaining and sharing that. But it strikes me as at least in the same vein, in the sense that is it the most productive way to get to the next step? So not in the same vein in terms of experience or in terms of what it feels like to be in that seat telling that story and that experience, but I don't know. It's an interesting question you asked.
Felicia, Usman, and then Rachel.
I just was going to respond that I'm not sure that everyone is even aware, right, to be able to come to the table, to be able to answer that or address that. I think there are a lot of people, to some folks' point, that don't recognize where they come into a place of being oppressive or discriminatory or racist, because our system is really good at hiding things. And so I think it's a great question for a number of reasons. Just as though it's like putting black folks on display. Do white folks want to be placed on display to be able to answer those questions in their time when they're vulnerable, when they're making mistakes? Whereas black and brown folks have had to be on display and constantly without that privacy that Dr. Patterson spoke of earlier. So my question to folks is, are people even aware to even get to that space? It's more of, I'm not convinced that enough people are aware that they are racist or that they carry that to be able to even come to the table, or they're too fragile to come to that conversation in all honesty, which is why affinity groups can be really great, where white folks have those conversations with other white folks that are doing that work. And so, again, my question is, are people even aware that they're in those spaces?
Yeah, just to build off of what people said, I mean, I'm going to be completely honest and cynical. I would never go to speak about my racial grievances publicly at a commission, so I just wouldn't. I got so many examples for y'all that living in this place for a long time, but I just wouldn't see it as a vehicle. I would believe that this commission is not going to do anything, and it's like why are you going to tell the police they ain't going to do nothing? They're just going to accuse you of doing something, and that mentality makes me very suspect about, listen, I said I'd volunteer to listen to one, but I'd be shocked if people come. A lot of black people I know around here just keep their head down, trying to make it happen. Last thing they want to do is stand up publicly and draw attention to themselves. And that actually speaks more, sadly, to the space, but it's just a reality that I believe. And I've said that, to Tom and others. And the second thing I think is that when you get people to tell you things, you've increased your burden to do something about it. So if I say, come in, I want you all to come in here, tell me, and they come in, you're a commissioner, we just increased our burden to do something about it. It's like, I told you all that stuff, and now you're going to do nothing about it? What did I come down there anyway for? People get pissed. Because even if you say to them, no, it's just a listening session, they think we have the ear of the mayor and the chief of police. They expect us to do something about it. And so I would be nervous on another level that we're giving false hope when we start saying the commission's going to listen to your grievances. And then with those grievances, what? We've documented them, put them in a folder. In 20 years, the next racial uprising, whatever, break out the folder, right? There's plenty of evidence in Northampton High School of all the variety of racist stuff that's happened, cataloging back to Rodney King, to the first original Northampton Commission, which the name got pulled off the part of racial, whatever it was called back in the 90s, right? So there's plenty of evidence. So I'm a little cynical about listening session, but I'm not anti it. I'm on the team. I will go and sit and listen, and I will document and try to clarify to people that we have no power to actually do anything about what you just told us. I'll say that. But ultimately, I think that, the educational piece, shifting gears, where we're going into communities, talking about the work we're doing, asking them for assistance, asking them for suggestions, listening to how they believe we can be productive in their particular realm, that I think would be a very positive use of our time. Right? Because what we're doing is we're going to the Civic Association, we're going to churches and synagogues and mosques, and we're going to community spaces, and we're saying, one or two of us, we're on this commission, this is the work we're doing. We believe that the Northampton Civic Association, or whatever the names are, the organizations, could possibly aid us in this by going to your records, the banks or whatever, go through your records, we're asking for your help. Here's how we imagine the help you're going to give is going to help the commission. That, I think, would be a productive use of time, because it's taking us one step forward toward information gathering, right? Which is what we need to do, and which is not easy, and it's going to take a long time. And I will say one follow-up thing to that is that I'm already in conversations. I go to attend St. John's Church. St. John's Episcopalian Church is very interested in this. They have, members, including my mother, shout out to Mom, is on the commission there to do this work, to go in the archives and find examples of racialized harm at the church. And so yeah, let's get the ball rolling and get into different communities and say, look at this institution. This is what they're doing. They're going in the attic and they're looking for the boxes. That's what we need. We need people to go in the attic and look for boxes. That's what we need, right? And so if we can get every institution in this town to go in the attic, go in the basement, find the boxes, find the evidence, help us, bring us that material, then we can say, okay, and we can lay out a narrative. But until we have that stuff, I met with Dylan over, up in, at Northampton, library. We were meeting and we're trying to, and he shows me the stuff. It's a lot of work. He's got volunteers. It's a lot of work, right? So we need help, right? And that help's going to come by people going to their, whatever organization, Elks Lodge, I don't care what it is, whatever it is, volunteer to go to the boxes, find the boxes. And I think that will push us forward. So that's my long way of saying I am proposing, right, educational initiatives that are two-way education. It's not one way where we're telling them everything, we're hearing from them, right? I think that will be, people will be more interested in that and participating in that than, perhaps, just listening. So that was a long diatribe.
Rachel, then Renika, then Felicia, and then Garrick.
First of all, I very much support everything that was just said. I totally agree. And to me, it's what order you do things in. So I think getting going with that part about collecting, opening the boxes, doing that hard work, then I do think that some kind of a listening session is needed. But it, in my mind, doesn't have to be talk about all your harms that have occurred to you. It could be focusing on the third part of our charge, which is how do we move forward as a community. And I think that would be very positive. And certainly during that discussion, we will be hearing some stories about the harms that people have had in their lives. I would be fine with it being also an all African-American group that does this. But then I think later there needs to be another meeting that includes the entire, that's totally open, to talk about where we're at, what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there are several different stages, but I do like the idea of first getting more data and then planning some kind of listening session that is more in terms of the institutional racism and where this community wants to go.
Thank you. Renika?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, too, that if the listening session is focused and more like, what are the recommendations you want us to take back to the mayor? Like, concrete things that, like, what would improve your life, your everyday life in Northampton? Because I've lived here for 16 years, and Northampton is very much a place that acknowledges racism but doesn't know a racist. And they'll be like, you can acknowledge, but, and so like you're not going to like have anything but defensiveness if you have open listening sessions, because people are going to hear themselves in what is being said, and they're going to, and it's not going to be productive, especially if we're looking for solutions. And to that mind, like, one of our charges is to help the city draft an apology. Well, what do Black people want to hear in that apology? Like, like, yes, slavery, Jim Crow, but what do they want to hear? And I think that, like, it could be not just an apology, but also, like, a charge to do better. Like, yes, we did this, these things happened, and this is our commitment to the future.
Yeah, I hear that. And I also, I wanted to say, I think moving past sort of the performative piece, and as I listened to you, Usman, talk about power, I think about positional power and how it's being wielded, how it's not being wielded, the ways in which people know that they carry it or they don't. And I think that if we're talking about educational programs, I think that building a foundation around positional power and awareness and the ways in which, like, as a commission, what power do we actually carry as Black and brown people? We do carry power, but what does that look like? It's not on what level. We're thinking about the institutional and systemic, or the individual or interpersonal. So I would just want to encourage us to think about building a sort of, as we continue to build shared understanding, thinking about positional power and the connection to our identities and this group.
So I just want to say that one thing that's become clear to me is that we're talking about things like a closed listening session. For me, that's just a way to say community. One thing that we have already discussed is we are lacking places for people of color, Black people, to congregate, tell these stories. You know, there are no Black barbershops, there's no Black hair salons. So I just have to say that really, for me, that is a big takeaway from this. Like, I am not interested in telling my story to the couple white people who don't know that there is racism in Northampton. I'm just not interested in having other people do that. And I also just wanted to bring up that, and I love everyone's opinions, and this is a great discussion. But the thing that stands out for me is that we talk a lot, and Usman said this too, there's a lot of work being done on reparations. People are approaching this from different angles. One of the best assignments that we've been given, Dr. Patterson, was to look at what other communities are doing for reparations. And I just want to remind us that even though what Amherst did was great work, they did what Amherst does, and we are Northampton, and I think that even in this discussion here, we are approaching it from a different perspective, and so I'm heartened that it feels like we are coming to kind of a understanding that we want to have whatever session we have be something that's productive and forward-thinking, that actually doesn't put us in this position where people are looking at us like we have to do it. It's one of the reasons why at our last meeting, when we talked about renaming it, and I was very hesitant to have reparations in the title, because I think the reparations, again, is something that we can suggest. We're putting forward suggestions, but if we have it in the title, a lot of people are going to think that we are going to start handing out reparations. And I think, we have to be very conscious of the expectations of people, especially if we're going to get them to come out and bare their souls and talk about, these very deep personal things.
Yeah, I just want to express that I mentioned this in the early documents that I wrote. I'm not in favor of a present-day harms report. I think that it is insane to try to put this in a public document for any and everybody across the world to read. I can't get behind a present-day harms report in our municipal report, because you would need permission from every single person that is speaking or that exists in Northampton as a Black or brown person. From my perspective, that would be the only judicious method. It is an enormous abuse to think that that is okay to do. I would not be behind it, and I would 100% step down. I would like to make a motion to allow Andrea Reber to be a guest speaker. Is there a second? Second. Call for it.
Bill Newman,
Yes.
Felicia Lundquist, Garrick Perry,
Yes.
Jeremy Baker Paquette,
Yes.
Marissa Elkins,
Yes.
Usman Power Green,
Yes.
Renika Montgomery Temeclo,
Yes.
Sarah Lynn Patterson,
Yes.
Rachel Naismith.
Yes.
Find my comments. I think that we can have a harms report that is systematic and is evident in unemployment rates, poverty rates, those sorts of things. If an institution comes forward and gives us their report, that's different, right? But I do not think that we should be generating a report of what people are saying and putting it in a document that, again, lives forever as long as the municipality lives. And they can't even properly think of all the resonances that might come. Do we think that African Americans who were slaves were like, yeah, people are going to be pondering every part of my life story, and who raped me and who forced me to give my kid up? Do you think they were thinking about that? And were they okay? So I just want to refine my comments, and I have always stated this. I made it very clear in those opening documents that I was not going to be a part of a project that documents a present-day harms report, because there are too many he said, she said, and privacy elements that we would need like 2 years to really think through before we try to start putting people's comments in a document that survives potentially for the lifespan of this entire municipal's lifespan. Andrea, you have the floor.
This is really an amazing discussion. And I just want to respond to one small part of it. When you, Sarah, put forth the idea that white people might be invited to come to a listening circle and talk about the ways that they have been racist, have engaged in racist behavior. The fact that you even put that out there is really, really important, and it's a good thing. And I also believe that if there are any listening circles that venture into this territory, that they do need to be affinity groups. They absolutely need to be separate black and separate white. And I think there would be a few, I can't say how many, not many, white people who would want to come forward and talk about that, because there are people in Northampton who are doing the inner work of recognizing not only how the system has benefited them, but the ways in which they have just made all kinds of assumptions that are hurtful to black people. So the fact that I gather these listening circles would be still public meetings, is that correct? That makes it much harder. I grant that. But even, I just want to put in a word for somehow trying to engage white people in that piece of self-reflection. Thank you.
I just want to quickly respond to that, because I think that is really a great suggestion. I think it goes back to the limitation of the commission versus the possibility of the commission inspiring organizations to do that work, right? So, for example, if an organization, a fraternal organization, for example, I mentioned Elks, stick with them, decided among their members to do such a meeting, facilitated perhaps by those that have the ability to do that, and they felt comfortable submitting some sort of representation of that, summary report or commentary, it would be valuable. You know what I mean? It would be of value. So, that thinking creatively about ways to still get at this and recognizing the limitations of the commission, I think is important, but one shouldn't be discouraged, as hopefully you're not, that there are ways to get the information to the commission, have it of value without it necessarily being the commissioners, singularly responsible for collecting data, that, once again, in that role. And then it makes me, as a follow-up, wonder, and this is a question, when we leave the door of the meeting, we're commissioners, we're citizens, we're teachers, we're partners, like, where's the line, right? If I go to St. John's and I'm, they asked me to come and they're eager to hear what we're doing. It's like, what is the line between us representing ourselves, as sort of, private citizens, and now commissioners? I don't know the answer to that. I'm curious, because that's already been something people brought up. You know what I mean? So if I go to Elks Lodge and sit there listening session, like, can I just go do that and not run it by all of you? We're all running around, listening and gathering data. I mean, does anyone have any thoughts on that, responses to that?
Marissa, you're acknowledged.
Thank you. And I don't have a response to you. It was made. It's one you're a lot to think about. Except for that, I do agree with you very much about, sort of the work of this commission. I kind of think that I do think that the work of this commission are part of what our job is, and I think Councilor Perry and I have a lot to contribute to at least this part of the conversation, is understanding what can be done by the municipal government within the power of this commission, within the power and in terms of the suggestions that we make. It is of no use for us to recommend to the city government that we, eradicate racism in all its forms and all its institutions across the whole world. That's not, that's not within the power of the city to do. So, and that being said, I'm also, like, I come from a place of being deeply optimistic about doing as much as we can within, our spot in the world. And so I'm hopeful that part of the conversations that we can have, and as we begin to translate that into specific recommendations for the Black community to consider whether or not it is meaningful to them. It seems like first step is to come up with recommendations, and then to have a way to gauge what recommendations we might make and whether or not those would be meaningful, and achieve the goals of reparation and redress and all of the things that we talked about in the definition of that. And then pass the ball to the city to do those things, to do as much of those things. So I do think there's some onus on us as a commission to work to understand that, and to buy into that, to buy into that this commission, the city doesn't have within its power to do everything, but can do some things. And for instance, the work that we talked about, the Elks Club getting together and doing some work around, among its white members to address and recognize, their own experiences and expressions of racism and ways that their privilege has benefited. Like, all of that work is good to do. And maybe what this commission can offer is a meaningful recommendation for how those kinds of programs could be facilitated, and what the city can do to bring those kinds of that kind of programming and work to our civic organizations and different places around the city. Like, that's a thing. That's a thing the city maybe could do, and that we could recommend. So it's both and. My response to Sarah's question wasn't meant to say that the work's not potentially good and that the inquiry's not worth having, or the work engaging in, what white people will do it, is whether or not this is this commission's role to host that or foster that. We should foster it, whether or not we can host it, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Bill?
At the risk of talking about something I know nothing about and being Pollyannish all at the same time, I find this discussion of the fraternal organizations in Northampton to be actually really interesting, because in this community, going back years, the Lions Clubs, the Elks Club are really important organizations. It's how you get your foot in the door of where the decisions are made and where the money is handed out from banks and other organizations. And I'm wondering whether these organizations, which I think, as far as I know, have really excellent reputations in the community, would be willing to talk to us about their organizational responses to racism historically in this community. Have there been, going back to the early 20th century, people of color in the Elks and the Lions? There may well have been. I don't know. I really don't. But I think that asking them if they would be willing to do a self-reflective kind of study and share that information with us might be helpful, and might get buy-in to what we end up ultimately recommending. So that is a specific proposal I would make, if someone would be willing to reach out to those organizations and, at least on a preliminary basis, see if they'd be willing to participate in that kind of an inquiry.
All right. My suggestion is that we move on to our next item, which is research study objectives. Part of my current work is to review some of the municipal data about 19th century African Americans. And I'm happy to note that I will be able to create a sort of geocoded projection of where folks were in the 19th century, and we'll be able to present that data to you guys so that we can engage in some analysis. I know one of our big questions at the very beginning was like, can we assign Black votership to a particular ward, and can we assign Black populations to a current ward and district? And that's been really hard to do in the present day sense because that data has not been collected systematically. And this is a point, as one of our frequent guests has mentioned, that Massachusetts does not have that type of aggregated data, and there's a bill on the floor at the state level. So present day is much harder, but for the 19th century, we can do some of that work, and so I'm really, really excited to do that work and then present it to you guys when I have it finished. I invite any other topics on research queries.
I'd like to ask a question from any of you who were involved with the city council's drafting of the resolution. And I keep going back really because this is the Evanston model to what about housing? And I know there is in the Northampton City Council's resolution a reference to one property that had a racially restrictive covenant. And I was interested and still interested to know whether, given the relatively recent computerization of land court records and registry of deed records, whether it would be possible to do a search of all the deed transfers in Hampshire County going back hundreds of years, using certain key words to see if it's possible to find out where there were racially restrictive covenants in Northampton's history in housing, particularly for the sale of housing. And I have that same kind of question with regard to the criminal justice system, but housing in particular, there's a lot of data potentially there. And it's really a question whether or not, when the Northampton City Council looked into this initially and found that one example, was there an attempt to expand that inquiry?
I can answer that.
Marissa?
No. I did that piece of it when we wrote it, came from the sort of initial drafts that we, the reparations committee put forward. But I did look into it and verify that potential, that particular code. I felt like I found the historical backup for it to be able to put it in there. So the short answer is no, but I agree with you, Bill, that there's a wealth of information probably in the property records that could be mined. I wonder if there might be somebody who's interested in the work that we're doing. Somebody that does title searches and knows, particularly adept in doing that kind of research. I lost the main feed.
Well, we can still hear.
Can't see Bill anymore. But yeah, I mean that is one thing, that legal stuff and property transfers are so infinitely researchable that it's definitely something we ought to be tapping.
Usman, then Tom.
Well, I just wanted to point out, as Tom and I raised our hand at the same time, was that I saw a very powerful documentary about Minneapolis. Do you guys see that at all? About their efforts, research efforts with restrictive covenants. And I definitely, something to share with those interested. But the partnership with the professor at a university and the community to go through deeds to find restrictive covenants, while painstaking had a team of graduate students, and they were going through and actually reading hundreds of these and then marking them, coding them in order to be able to create a database. I didn't even have my mic on. Sorry, database in order to to see the magnitude of them. And so I think that, again, if there hasn't been efforts done yet, I certainly was inspired to see their process. And actually turned out one of my students in my class, actually from Indianapolis, was talking about, had heard about that as well. Recent one, like 2022 documentary. Short, like WGBH film, not a documentary, but like one that was done about this specifically. So I'll get that info to people to look at an example, of how, again, not remaking the wheel and seeing how they do it. I mean, it was labor intensive, but, with grants and partnerships, it could be something that could help. Short term, not sure, but definitely long term. But short term, I think that if it hasn't already been done, it would be interesting to I've heard informally by people that a few people, that their houses had restrictive covenants, racist covenants. That was informal in passing. Perhaps with a public call or something, we could get people to at least give us, that evidence, sort of some anecdotal examples, as opposed to a much more comprehensive study of it, which I think would, obviously that's its own project and would take more time. But for the sake of commission, I think that might be a good idea to try to do something where it's more people coming forward. Yeah, just to respond to that, Marissa, you had a response to that?
Yeah, I do actually, which is the anecdotal idea is maybe a good one, and I think the place to tap is not to make it all about lawyers, but property lawyers, people who do real estate transactions. Every time we sell a house, they have to do a title search, so there might be a couple who are able to at least have in their memory, something, some transaction that they were involved with that had some place in its title history, a covenant that they recall. I mean, it's like you said, it's going to be anecdotal. It's not going to be the kind of comprehensive coding and searching that you talked about, but I'm sure that there would be enough. But there are definitely a few lawyers I can think of at the top of my head that would be. Would certainly if they had the information would put it out there and participate. So that's something to tap. Maybe we can tap the Hampshire County Bar Association to kind of reach out to its members and I'll chat with Bill and see if we can come up with some other ideas for ways to kind of bring in some of that kind of information. Where did Bill go?
He's right next to me, I assure you, Marissa.
Okay, he was like right there on my screen, and he's disappeared.
Garrick wouldn't let me go anywhere. But I do think, I think that's a really good idea. I'd like to, let's just talk about it, because I have another idea while you're talking, about where this anecdotal evidence at least may lie at this point. So let's talk, and then let's approach, if it's okay with everyone here, at least, let's see if we can come up with some suggestions on where the information is. And we also may have a chat with the Register of Deeds to see what does that office have as available resources for us, because I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
of course, I'm just going to be that person that just advise that we always remain cautious in these sorts of questions, because you get a lawyer and then someone else preemptively gets a lawyer. And so just, if someone lives somewhere and they feel that they may be threatened in some way, then they might be preemptive. So I just want to place that out there, which is just to try to maintain a historical reach as opposed to present day, because then that's when people start being preemptive about action against us, and I don't want to invite any sort of preemptive action.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I also think it would be useful for us to know when racially restrictive covenants were illegal in Massachusetts, because
Yeah, that's a really good question. Tom?
Yeah, I'm totally not into inventing wheels. When Amherst, and you've heard me talk about them before, because I think they are a good model. They're not the only one, and it's not a total blueprint, but they did have people, and I don't know how this is going to work with you all. They had a housing person, an education person, a healthcare person, a transportation, and they studied the background history of how the racism operated within each one. And they found records about housing covenants. That it wasn't needing to be just anecdotal. They got them out of the records. They had neighborhoods that were restrictive covenants from studying the records that they had. So it might be worth asking, where did you look? Those kind of things, because they invented some wheels. They weren't a lot of groups that were doing it before them. You had Evanston and then Amherst and other places. So there is some wisdom that they might be able to share.
Tom, isn't it true that there was a group of citizens that brought to the commissioners information?
Yeah, they had people that studied in advance doing
Right.
some of the work, and then a woman from Amherst College organized them. But I just think they could provide some good ideas for how to go about it.
Absolutely, but it wasn't members of the commissioners doing that work. I just want to put out the point of information.
Yeah, however you can organize for it
Yes,
is the
yes, I
method.
just want to make sure that's clear.
That certainly might be a segue, Sarah, to think about the subcommittees, because I ultimately, with the research objectives, our research objectives, the theme certainly, and specifically coming from me, is the need to recognize our limitations as a commission, and to figure out a strategic way to go about gathering the information we need. Right now, what's developed, and of course I've been guilty of it myself in terms of meeting with Dylan, and Dylan is the archivist, for those that don't know, at Northampton, at Forbes Library, for doing some of this work. So we're on doing another project together, so I brought this up, and also with the church. That's anecdotal. I'm sort of like my own. We probably, and I don't know if we have enough time or if this is still is considered a part of the next steps or research study objectives, but I do think that the subcommittees that you all, establish and, that I think are fine, we should maybe come up with, all right, what's our strategy for gathering information? What specifically, can we commit to? How much time do we have personally between this meeting and next to commit to trying to maybe, partner with entities or ask people if they're interested, if that's the purview. So I don't know if we're allowed to do that, if that's appropriate. We should discuss it now. Is it appropriate? So I'll ask the question. Is it appropriate for commissioners to ask community members to research aspects or agenda items that we see as important for our work? Is that appropriate? Yeah, Marissa?
I would actually go a step further and say that, maybe what, not for the purpose of doing the work, but to break down the, yes, for the purpose of doing the work, but not as in that this person does the work, but that we ought to divide into, I think it might be useful to divide into subcommittees about the topics of research, and then each subcommittee's job is going to be to do that, what you just said, to reach out to the community and find who will help do the work, and take some responsibility for structuring it and putting the work together to bring back to the commission, so I stand ready to team up with Bill to look at this property issue and also in the criminal system in the courts. I think that's in my wheelhouse. I know, I'm not suggesting I do all the work, but that I know who to ask to get some work done. And we're not. I think that process is not going to get us necessarily a PhD dissertation academic kind of situation that takes. Well, I never got a PhD, but I understand they can take a while to get. But that we can get what can be done within this commission, and move it toward a work product that translates into meaningful reparations, suggestions.
I just have a follow-up question to that. So this again is to everybody. If we were to go ahead and ask people, as commissioners, will you be involved? Will they be able to then identify themselves as partnering with the commission to do research in behalf of the commission? Is that, What if, yeah, Bill?
So I defer to the city councilors, but it seems to me that if you have a conversation with person X,
Yeah.
and you ask them, are they willing to do this research? And they say yes. If you bring it back here, it becomes a public record as long as they're willing to be identified, and we say, yes, we'd like them to do that, and off they go. I mean, I don't think it has to be more complicated than that, does it?
I think that there are temporal markers that should be in place for certain topics that are sensitive. And whatever you invite that hasn't been scrutinized and it gets passed around to us is public record already. That's just a point of information I'm making, not a judgment.
So in that case, if those are the answers affirmative, then I want to say that I suggest that in whatever time we have, 6 minutes, that we at least attempt to, I mean, we have two concrete examples of places that people feel maybe they have time to actually look into. Are there other people or other subtopics that people feel comfortable, reaching out, creating committees, reaching out in the community? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, Felicia, others, I don't know if people are tapped into other networks that could possibly do it, the students, yeah.
I actually think that this is a conversation for next meeting, not for the next 5 minutes, because there's another agenda item. But it seems if Bill and Marissa want to move forward, yeah, with just the understanding of some of the caveats that we've expressed, that makes perfect sense to me. I would never tell the counselor and the lawyer not to. All right. Jeremy, please make a note of whatever you're going to say, and then we will start with you next meeting, okay? So we want to move forward with announcements and next steps. I just want to rehearse the piece that Marsha Morris described last meeting, which is that February 11th is the date of the Black History Month service at College Church. Do you guys have the specific, I know it's from abolitionism to white fragility, that's the title. I'm not sure what time that is. Can you look it up real quick?
Yeah, I have it in my last I'm looking at the email. It's a Sunday, February 11th at 1 p.m. All right.
Next meeting, we're going to reopen up the conversation about the commission authoring a draft of an apology to move forward. I know Marissa, last time we talked about it, felt strongly that the apology should actually originate with city government. So if you feel comfortable, Marissa, speaking to that next meeting, I'd invite that. Okay, thank you. All right, I make a motion to adjourn. Second.
All right, let me just pull up my list of people. Bill Newman.
Yes.
Felicia Lundquist. Eric Perry.
Yes.
Jeremy Baker Pickup.
Yes.
Marissa Elkins.
Yes.
Usman Power Green.
Yes.
Renika Montgomery Tamaclo.
Yes.
Sarah Lynn Patterson.
Yes.
Rachel Naismith.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Thank you. Good night, y'all.
Good night,